Okay, this is something that Dad wrote himself about 9 months before he passed. So it happened. I'm actually dead. Sorry about the intro music. There was something there about abandonment and unfair separation that I felt needed to be felt here today. Did I die well? I've got no idea. Did I live well? Who knows? I had a great time. Wasn't the greatest father, wasn't much of a husband either. I wasn't that good at anything really. Bluffed my way effortlessly through a charmed life. But that was me. Maybe that was enough. I remember years ago, Neil Thomas telling me that I seemed to be able to fall in a bucket of shit and come out smelling like roses. It's something I've always remembered and believed. Thank you, Neil. If Neil could influence me so profoundly with a single statement, then what effect, if any, did I have on others? How would I be remembered? So I asked around. Turns out I passed. Not a distinction, but a reasonable passing grade, in spite of my hedonistic and selfish life choices. I loved everyone in our extended families, the ex-wives, all the kids, their partners and grandchildren without exception. The Williamsons had a lot to do with who I am, Kathy and Peg especially. I think they developed my moral code, both great role models for a young boy. Jim, not so much. And more recently, I think Peter's rock solidness, confidence, and unconditional style of friendship inspired me to be someone better. Annie, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry that death came to me so soon. I loved our life together. I was so happy. The support I received from everyone at home and in hospital humbled me. Everyone was so loving and caring. Strange as it may seem, Susan Perryman and Chrissy Kennedy come to mind here. For the past few years, I haven't felt that I was myself, the chemo and the cannabis. And that's as far as Dad got. I'd just like to share a little bit about Dad's last day. So he was in Clare Holland House and he'd gone through some downhill stages quite quickly, and he was at Clare Holland House only for 2.5 days. But on his last day, all the family were there. Sam and Rosie sang to him. We all sat with him. And we were all with him and had our hands on him to his last breath. So he was completely surrounded by love and music right to the end. I'm going to pass over to Peter now, and then I'll read some more words that I've written. There's also a book by Dad's ashes. If you'd like to share any memories you have of Dad, it would be great if you could write them in the book. Right, thanks.
I represent the Melbourne side of Tony's existence. He grew up in Melbourne, as most people know, and my family was very close to his family, and we've kept the connection going all throughout Tony's life. I think I can claim in that respect to be Tony's longest friend, and probably his oldest too. From my point of view, he's very close to my best friend. I have to say, I speak on behalf of my siblings, Jim, Helen, Elizabeth, Arthur, and Kathy, who all love Tony. Tony moved to Canberra when he was 12, but before that we all used to holiday down at Sorrento, and I think that was what drew the great bond between the family, and that's why we're we're still here together. Tony moved around a lot in his lifetime. I remember when he came to Melbourne as a freshly minted aircraftsman in the Air Force with his new wife, Chrissy. His father, Frank, had taken me aside and asked me to look after Tony and Chrissy while they were in Melbourne. I'm not sure what Frank expected, but from then on it seemed to me that their life consisted mostly of sitting with my parents, Alf and Peg, around the dining room table drinking old-fashioned VB long necks with the rest of us. I did, however, form a strong and lasting friendship with Tony and Chrissy, which has kept going through their times in Sydney and the South Coast and Canberra. I'd like to remember Tony through the good times we had together. And of course, everyone has different experiences and different memories. I could spend all afternoon, but I won't, recounting the happy and terrifying experiences we had with Tony on our various canoe trips, or the good times we had with him in Sydney and Byron Bay. Tony enjoyed adventure. He loved to come with us on these whitewater canoe trips, all of which turned out to be disasters in some form or other. On one 3-day trip down to Murrumbidgee, we camped on an island in the middle of the river, even though we were a little bit nervous that the water from the Burrinja Dam might be released during the night and flood the campsite. After dark, Tony took the opportunity to explore the island and informed us that there was a skull mounted to a tree in the darkness. It was creepy. As we drank and smoked into the night, Tony's topic of conversation was not just the sinister implications of the skull, but the stretch of water that we would navigate the following day, which Tony had identified as Dead Man's Cove. He had a talent for the melodrama. Needless to say, we survived the trip. Everyone was always pleased to see Tony. He spent a lot of time coming to Melbourne and up in Byron Bay and to Sydney when we lived there. And Tony never disappointed. He was always the life of the party. Always good for an argument, and he naturally adopted the opposite view from the prevailing one in his own way, in his own quiet way. My Danish friends in Melbourne remember him fondly for the night he went to dinner at their place and had their kids fascinated with his theory of how humans had developed from dolphins. The kids still remember it today. Tony made me buy a convertible. It's hard to believe that one man could make another man buy a car, but it happened. I had conceived an idea that the two of us would get a convertible, drive up to Byron Bay, smoke dope and watch our favourite movies. This plan relied on getting a convertible, but as I suffer from chronic procrastination, it was never going to happen. Tony knew this, and so he kept on finding convertibles on the net and sending me out to look for them. I finally found one, and our trip up north was on. Playlists were created, the route was planned along the back roads, and agreements were struck on the limits to the time we would spend arguing about Donald Trump. I think this was a kind of bucket list trip because I'd been recently diagnosed with cancer and had a use-by date. Tony didn't know it at the time, but his number was also up. Needless to say, we had a great time driving through the valleys behind the Dividing Range with the roof down and the Beach Boys blaring. When we got to Byron Bay, we duly hunkered down with some marijuana purchased from our side trip to Nimbin and watched our all-time favourite movies. I didn't realise that there was no limit to the number of times that Tony would watch The Big Lebowski, and how many times I'd be under pressure to watch it too. I think The Big Lebowski has maybe shaped the trajectory of Tony's life. It was a trip I'm very glad I did, and I hope Tony looked back fondly on it as I do. Our family maintained a close contact with Tony over the years. We're all deeply saddened by his death. It seemed to us that Tony would always be young, and I think this was actually true right up until his last weeks, when his body disagreed with his spirit. It's comforting to us that Annie cared for him to the end, and he spent his last days surrounded by his loving family. Goodbye, Tony. We all miss you.
Hi everyone, my name's Ross. I first met Tony 30 years ago when he and his wife Sue turned up at our farm looking for second-hand draw, which we didn't have, and we got talking, and I remember Tony remarking that we had led somewhat of parallel lives, as he had briefly attended Moonapons Central School at the same time that I had. He had joined the Air Force for 6 years, partly to avoid taking his chances of being conscripted. Years later, we checked his birth date against the numbers coming out of the barrel, and his wasn't one of them. I won the lottery, including all expenses paid return trip to Vietnam. Then the other connection was we both enjoyed going to the Down to Earth festivals that Jim Cairns and Junie Morosi organised, and gave us a yearning to live in more alternative environments and getting a rural block. Once Tony and Sue moved into Tusslebury down the road from me, Tony and I got on so well that we purchased tractors, chainsaws and other farm equipment to share, which made so much sense. We would cut firewood together and help each other out as necessary. When my wife Marion and I took up an offer of work exchange position at the New Age community of Findhorn in northern Scotland in 1996, Tony made the extraordinarily generous offer of running our honey business for 3 months while we were away. On one very eventful trip included Tony driving our truck in second gear all the way from Cooma to Canberra and arranging for the gearbox to be repaired, and still managed to do the deliveries using a borrowed ute. When Tony moved back to Canberra, first to a little flat here at Goolabri, we would regularly stay with him on our business trips. When he met Annie and bought the handyman's dream at Sutton, we continued to visit and were always astonished at the renovation work that had taken place between visits. Of course, we still remember the visits to their retreat at Wandella, living in 2 caravans with a garden shed as a bedroom built above one of the caravans. I think their retreat involved 5 creek crossings and the acceptance that they would be trapped in during heavy rain. I can only think that Tony and Annie decided to live very basically but comfortably at Wandella to finally put to rest the experience that alternative off-grid lifestyle that for some of us it was a yearning that had come out of the 1960s back to the land movement. Of course, I cannot finish without mentioning Tony's absolute passion for his music. It is with fond memories that the last time a friend and I visited Tony, he played the keyboard and sang to us. It is with deep affection I can say I am glad that I was a small part of his rich life journey. Bless you, Tony. May you rest in peace.
Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today to celebrate Dad's life. And a big thank you to Linda and Gordon and Ben and Dan for putting everything together for today. I feel very grateful to have shared so many years of Dad's journey with him, through lots of different chapters of his life and different versions of Tony, Dad, Pa. He was a punk rock star with dyed green hair and a ripped barbed wire t-shirt. New age muso with permed hair and long multicoloured scarf like Doctor Who. Owner of the most iconic shop in Canberra, he literally had shop groupies. A naked hippie swimming in the river, custodian of Lanyon, a gardener, teacher and restorer of history. A student of permaculture and small hobby farmer, making dried apple and raspberry pulp and the best tasting honey ever. Builder of his fantasy home in the bush with Annie at Lycan Ridge. Adored and cheeky Pa, who was always dobbed in for having too much chocolate. And a courageous fighter against multiple myeloma. I want to thank you, Annie, for looking after Dad all these years and for looking after us. Dad had a magic energy, an inner light that shone brighter than anyone I've ever known. Everyone who met him adored him, and he could see magic in everything and everyone. You didn't just do things with Dad, you had experiences. When we went to the movies, you couldn't eat your ice cream until the start of the movie so that all of your senses were activated at the same time. Introducing new music was an experience. Sam and I would have camel rides on Dad's back listening to the Modern Lovers, and we learnt nursery rhymes from The Residents and Snakefinger, and they were twisted, trippy and spooky versions, very different to the ones we learnt at school. And I was the only one who would add the verse about the monster on the bus. One of my favourite music experiences was when Dad came home with the Trains record. He got Sam and I to lie down on the floor between the speakers with our eyes closed. At first you could only hear birds and a dog barking, then the whistle of a train far off in the distance. After a few seconds, the whistle would get a little closer and closer, then you could start to hear the chug of the engine until finally the train would scream, rolling right over you and out the speaker on the other side. An experience that I then loved sharing with others who would come to visit. When walking through Tilba with Dad, he'd point out the beautiful gardens on the side of the road. See that, Em? No one planted that there. No one waters it. It just grows like magic. Living at Lanyon with Dad was truly a magical experience and a bit of a blur. But there was always a welcoming fire and a pot of pumpkin soup on the old Canberra metal stove. Even a couple of days before Dad's passing, it was really important for him to watch The Big Lebowski with his kids. We ended up watching High Fidelity, Dad's other favourite movie, as we'd all seen The Big Lebowski recently, and we planned to watch it a few days later, which unfortunately wasn't possible. But the kids and I plan to watch The Big Lebowski every January from here on in, and hopefully Dad will be watching with us. I really loved hearing Dad play piano, and he would always bring his special magic to every performance. My favourites were of course Nick Cave and Neil Young, and he'd even bring an imaginary joint up to his lips during Hurricane, a brilliant entertainer. And it wasn't just musical performances. He was also a committed character performer, making up exciting bedtime stories and doing a huge variety of different character voices. For morning cuddles, Dad would create the good and the bad froggies, bringing so much personality and character to his hands. And I love trying to catch the diggity-dig-dig. My 17th birthday was a vampire theme. Dad locked himself in his bedroom before my party began and wouldn't speak to me. I was so angry with him and confused. Then he came out in full makeup and costume with a hunched back. He was my evil henchman and stayed in character the whole party, greeting people at the door with a candle and, "Do you have your invitation?" And he even bit off the head of a rose and spat the petals across the lounge room. Of course, there were special performances for his 40th and 50th birthdays, while during his speech about stripping back the layers of conformity and social restraints, he was removing items of clothing until he dived into the pool in a loincloth and came out completely naked. Dad did love swimming naked. These committed performances continued into his later years at my kids' birthday parties. He was Magic Pa pulling a live rabbit out of a hat, King Tony, Blackbeard the pirate, so committed to his character that a couple of kids cried, Sensei Wu, and the most wonderful magical Dumbledore. I'm so grateful that my kids got to experience Dad's magic and that they have their own treasured memories of their time with Pa, teaching Dylan to ride a bike and playing on the swings with Henry, taking time to also push his imaginary friend. Dad wasn't big on gifting material things, but he gave great gifts of growth, knowledge, wisdom, support, magic, and experiences. Dad's greatest gift is definitely the big, beautiful, loving, blended family that we have here today. Everything reminds me of Dad, especially when I hear Nick Cave or Neil Young, or the sound of the wind whistling through the casuarina trees, when I taste pumpkin soup, and when I smell patchouli or pot. I know that Dad's magic isn't really gone. It's still here inside of me and inside